Hi, everybody. Welcome to Act Now. I'm Julianna Forlano. We have a great show in store for you today. The Supreme Court heard arguments Wednesday on the Mississippi law that prohibits abortion after 15 weeks. And outside the courthouse, there were rallies, protests, and acts of civil disobedience. We were on the scene there, and we're going to cover that in our action rundown. But on the show first today, we have Meagan Hatcher-Mays, attorney and Director for Democracy Policy for Indivisible. She joins us to break down the legalese we all heard in the courtroom yesterday. Then, fresh off her arrest for peacefully protesting the rollback of a woman's right to bodily autonomy, Heidi Sieck, co-founder of Vote Pro Choice and fierce advocate for women across the country. We have a powerful show coming up, so share the link now if you're watching live. Invite your friends to a watch party and follow us wherever you are. The show is Act Now. We cover progressive political movements in the United States, and we are live on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. on whatever platform you're watching now. Coming up first, our conversation with Meagan Hatcher-Mays of Indivisible. The Supreme Court is deliberating after hearing arguments Wednesday on a Mississippi law that prohibits abortion after 15 weeks. The case has the potential to overturn Roe v. Wade, a move that would have enormous implications for abortion access in the United States. Joining me today, and I'm very happy to have you with us, Meagan Hatcher-Mays, attorney and director of democracy policy for Indivisible. Meagan, can you help us break down what just happened?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, I think a lot of people who have been watching the Supreme Court, a lot of people who care about abortion, about reproductive freedom, predicted that today was going to be, or that the oral arguments were going to be very grim. And they were. I think the Supreme Court, unfortunately, does look very poised to strike down Roe v. Wade in one way or another. I think the question really comes down to how they're going to do it. But there does appear to be 5 votes to uphold this Mississippi law, which would put really severe restrictions on people seeking abortions in that state. And that would open the doors for other states to follow suit with similarly restrictive laws. It was really difficult to listen to for people who think that women and people who can get pregnant should have bodily autonomy. I think a lot of the justices just don't care about that. The conservative ones in particular just don't seem to think that that is as important as pregnancy, forcing a person into pregnancy.
Yeah. Yes. I found it very, very sickening to hear the conservative judges cut off the attorney for Jackson Women's Health Organization, Julie Rickleman. She was making her arguments and they didn't even let her speak the arguments aloud, perhaps knowing that media outlets were streaming, and the whole world is watching whether the United States will roll back a woman's right to choose. Is this normal, or were we just seeing partisan politics play out on the Supreme Court?
That's a great question. It's difficult to answer. It's normal for this particular constellation of justices. Yes. It's not normal for a fundamental constitutional right to be at risk in this way. Usually when something is settled in front of the Supreme Court for 50 years, that's kind of the end of the story, especially when that right is so fundamental to kind of the fabric of American life. And that's what abortion and reproductive rights are. They are really fundamental to the way that women can participate in life. That's how we know we are equal, is because we have the ability to choose for ourselves how we want to live our lives. And that's been true with the Supreme Court for 50 years. They decided Roe in 1973, and then they reaffirmed it in Casey in 1992. And here we are. The fact that the court decided to take this case at all is appalling. This is well settled constitutional precedent, a woman's right to choose. It has been for 50 years. So the fact that they're hearing this case at all is really depressing. And it's not normal for this to be the case in front of the Supreme Court.
Can you give us a little bit of a breakdown of the mechanics it's not a complete overturn of Roe v. Wade. So could you give us a little bit of the mechanics of what's going on here legally?
Sure. Well, so Mississippi actually is asking the court to completely overturn Roe versus Wade and to overturn Casey, the two kind of leading precedents on abortion rights in this country. But barring that, what they would like the Supreme Court to do is to at least uphold this 15-week ban. And so there might be some people watching this thinking, oh, 15 weeks, well, that's not as bad as Texas's ban, right? Because that bans them after 6. But any ban on pre-viability pregnancies is not good, and it is misogynistic. It sets women as second-class citizens anytime that the state tries to interfere with our right to choose what's best for our bodies. So Mississippi is asking for either for the court to overturn Roe versus Wade entirely, or to at the very least uphold this 15-week ban, which, despite what folks may think, is actually just as bad as an 8-week or 6-week ban on pregnancy. What that would do if the court were to uphold the 15-week ban, it would open the door for other states to say, who may be sitting on the sidelines, say, okay, great, well, we can at least do a 15-week ban. And you know for a fact that a lot of more conservative states are going to want to push the limits of those week-long bans.
And so the legal precedent is really viability. That's what this all turns on.
Yeah.
A woman has her own rights until the unborn or the fetus is viable outside the womb, which would bestow at this point in history some rights on that particular fetus. Am I getting that right?
That's basically right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So basically how it works is that pre-viability, the woman has an interest in how she wants this pregnancy to proceed. At a certain point, which is post-viability, what the court has said is post-viability, there's an interest that shifts from the woman and possibly to the state, who has an interest now in making sure that a fetus that is viable can survive. So you have to weigh those interests. And historically, the court has said pre-viability, it goes in favor of the woman carrying the pregnancy, and post-viability, there might be some opportunities there for the state to get involved. So that's exactly right. That's exactly what's at stake here today. Whether states can actually move that bright line back from viability into pre-viability, which then affects women's interests in.
But what would the legal case be for that? I mean, what would it even be? I was listening to the whole court proceeding, but as a non-attorney myself, it was kind of hard to parse exactly what legal standing they would have to do this.
Yeah, I mean, the real answer to that question is that there isn't a good one. There's not a good constitutional argument, and there's not a good legal argument to deny women the right to abortion. I think Justice Kagan basically said this. Not much has changed, actually, from 1973 to today. There are still tough questions, but the court back then said, we know it's a tough question, but this is what we've decided, and we have to stick with this because there's always going to be somebody who disagrees with us. And so that's what's happening. Mississippi is like, well, I disagree with you, and I think you should overturn it. There's very specific situations in which a court can overturn their precedent. And in my view, this doesn't rise to the level of that. Basically, it's usually a situation where so much has changed in American society that justice really requires that we overturn it. And I think we have seen that in like Brown v. Board and in Plessy v. Ferguson, where we were dealing with racial discrimination and school segregation. Ultimately, the court said we can't continue to allow these laws to exist, even though previously they had said it was fine. This is a situation where nothing like that has shifted. There is no new emerging scientific information that shows that, that has fundamentally changed our understanding of how pregnancies work from 1973 to today, as far as whether or not abortions should be legal. So there's really no good basis to do this. I think even the Mississippi state legislatures who passed this bill into law admitted as much when they passed it. They said the reason that we're doing this is because the makeup of the Supreme Court is different, and we think we have a chance to get this law upheld. That's why they're doing it. It's purely political, it's purely partisan, and they're hoping that the new constellation of justices on the Supreme Court will join them in this partisan attack on women's bodily autonomy and reproductive freedom.
This goes outside of, the law, but it goes to social policy. Don't you think that if lawmakers and community members and religious leaders who really wanted to bring the numbers of abortions down could look at the statistics of why women sometimes and often have abortions. Often it is for financial reasons. They simply cannot afford to feed, clothe, educate a child in this world where social services are being cut left and right. Perhaps they already have children. Would it not be just a better way to go about bringing the numbers of abortions down if that truly is the reason for this constant push against a woman's right to choose? Wouldn't it just be easier to do that by increasing social supports for women so that they could have children that they might, otherwise feel they have to choose against?
Yes, absolutely. It's very ironic because the backdrop of this case is right now the Senate is debating whether or not to include paid leave and a universal pre-K in this big spending bill that they're trying to pass. You can't have one without the other. If you want to encourage people to have kids, if there's, then we need to be able to support the people who are getting pregnant. And actually this came up again during oral arguments. Mississippi has an extremely high mortality rate for women who give birth in that state. It's very, very high. So at the very least, we need to be examining, regardless of what happens with this case, we need to be examining how do we protect women who are giving birth from death? How do we protect those kids once they're born? So making sure that they have access to good education, universal pre-K, making sure that their parents have access to economic opportunities so that having a child is not such a sort of grave expense. But of course, the same people who are arguing to overturn abortion laws also don't support expanding the social safety net. So we're really in a grim era right now.
It's hard not to make the argument that this is really just about subjugating women, because
Correct.
Most women, if they have a child, aren't just going to throw that child on the open sea and say, sorry, I can't feed you. You can't leave kids in the woods. You know what I mean?
Yes. Right.
And most women would not do that anyway. And so that means women's choices are going to be curtailed. If they don't have childcare, how are they going to have a job? How are they going to participate in the economy?
That's exactly right. And I think people should understand that this is not going to stop at abortion, because up next is access to contraception. Up next is, who knows what.
I heard them talking. So, thank you for bringing that up. I heard them talking about that. I forget which one of these right-wing nuts were like, well, abortions cost $600 at the Jackson clinic. And you also have to have, get a ride fees and other fees, but contraception costs much less. Well, contraception, number one, is fallible. Therefore, they're just blaming the woman for getting pregnant. They just clearly, plus women are going to just drive if they have the means to other states. So that price argument is not.
Right. And this has always been true. High income women are always going to be able to get safe and legal abortions. That's not in question. This is going to disproportionately negatively impact low income women, Black women, and women of color. Already does. These mortality rates that I was talking about before, that very disproportionately affects Black women and women of color in Mississippi. So high income women are going to be fine no matter what. White women, high income women are going to be okay. But this is really about really, just like what you said, subjugating women to carry pregnancies to term that they don't want or can't afford, because they also aren't able to access contraception either. That's also true. So this is really very grim, very scary time for women in this country, because it's, again, not going to stop at Texas and Mississippi.
So the case does not just outright and ban abortions, right? But there is this. So I'm glad you could give us the breakdown of what's happening there. When the court comes back into session on Monday, what do you expect to see and hear?
Yeah, first of all, I think that this case probably will not be decided anytime soon. So the arguments were today, but usually these cases that are very fraught with sort of social issues, for lack of a better word, those take a long time to decide. So usually those big ticket cases don't get decided until the end of term. So that would be June 2022. That's historically been the case for like the gay marriage cases and other big cases like that. They just take a long time to compromise.
But arguments are done. Is that right?
Arguments are done. But we're still waiting to hear actually from the Supreme Court on what they're going to do about Texas's abortion ban. So that would be SB 8. That the Supreme Court has taken no action on that bill yet, which has allowed, that very draconian law out of Texas to be in place for 93 days, I think, at this point.
That's the 6-week ban. Plus you can report on your neighbors and anyone who participates in any way, be it giving you an aspirin, giving you a Uber ride in an abortion, can be penalized.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They basically created a bounty system for private citizens to sue their neighbors, and they can get a $10,000 bonus if they succeed. It's horrific. So it could be that we hear next week finally what the Supreme Court wants to do about that case. Well, they had gotten the case over the summer, and then they heard arguments about this already.
Right.
And then they heard arguments in the Mississippi case this week. So it's been kind of like a month-long journey for reproductive justice at the Supreme Court. I think honestly, I think this is a break glass moment for reproductive justice in this country. I think people should be really concerned about what's going to happen in the Supreme Court. I think even if the Supreme Court allows this challenge over SB 8 to continue, I don't think that Roe v. Wade, as we know it, stands much of a chance because of this sort of assault on the judiciary from the right for the last 50 years. That this is the culmination of that. They've stacked the Supreme Court with extremists, and the whole point was to get people on the bench to overturn Roe v. Wade, and we're here now. It's happening. It's very concerning. It's very scary.
It's very hard to look over, we can look to history, but it is very hard to look at contemporary civic life in the United States and even picture what it means to not have safe abortion available to women. Yeah,
I shudder to even try to imagine that future. I think everybody in the progressive atmosphere really needs to start thinking about how we're going to get women the care that they need if they live in states that have made it so difficult to get just basic healthcare services. So that's going to have to be an ongoing conversation, because this really is not looking good for bodily autonomy, reproductive justice, and all fundamental rights that we thought were secure in front of the Supreme Court, quite frankly, are up for grabs, I think, at this point. That's how frightening the conservative justices on the Supreme Court are.
Well, we'll have to get into a discussion with you if you could come back and talk about expanding the court.
I know, of course.
Okay, I'm gonna literally email you right after this.
Great.
And we'll get you
all I want to do is add those seats.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Meagan Hatcher-Mays, Director of Democracy Policy for Indivisible. I really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay. Well, that was great. It's very depressingly horrid, but good interview.
Something nice to say, but I was like, we're fucked.
I know. I heard that in the voice. I'm like, we're totally fucked. And then the other, I'm not exactly sure, which one would be worse, the Mississippi one or the Texas one, or are they going to do both? I mean,
I actually think what's probably going to happen is that they're going to try to sell it as a compromise, right? So that they'll take some action that looks good on SB 8, where it's like, okay, well, that goes too far. And then by comparison, it's the Mississippi law is going to not look as bad, right? Because it's like, 8 weeks is bad, but 15 weeks, that seems reasonable. But it's not. But I think that's what they're going to try to do as a PR move, is to try to convince people that it is not that bad. But
if they're working on a PR move, that means they're not, a Supreme Court that is above partisan politics. They're working specifically for what I would call the fascist movement in the United States.
Yeah, and John Roberts in particular is hyper aware of public perception of the court. And so he tends to be an incrementalist who makes PR moves that make it look like what he's doing isn't that bad. Unfortunately, what's happened is that a bunch of the other conservatives who've since been confirmed are accelerationists who don't care as much about that. Mm-hmm. And so they might care a little bit about the perception of the court. We actually saw over the summer, a bunch of them were giving, I've never seen this before, giving remarks basically saying we don't need to add seats. The Supreme Court's perfect. We're not politicians. We're not partisans, blah, blah, blah. But
And yet,
but they wouldn't be saying that unless they were scared that that we were going to do it, that we were going to add the seats, right? So so I don't really know what to make of all of that, but they are aware of public perception, so they want to do the bad thing. They just don't want anyone to notice that they've done the bad thing, if that makes sense. So
well, obviously this is going to go into the interview.
Sorry, it's very casual.
Do you have any thoughts about whether Biden and his administration would even consider this? And if I'm thinking politically, I'm thinking, well, if I'm Biden and I'm thinking politically, and I might actually consider doing this, or the Democrats in general, I would want to wait until the Supreme Court showed its ultra conservative hand for all to see, because again, I believe it's 72% of Americans, which is an enormous majority, want abortion to be safe and legal. This is a small minority of people who are pushing for this, conservative, ultra conservative agenda. Do you think the Biden administration or the Democrats would actually take that kind of action?
That's a great question. So I think that Supreme Court expansion, so look, it's not that popular. I think people think that that's like a nuclear option to add seats to the Supreme Court. I think what advocates for court expansion, myself included, would say is that's right. It is the nuclear option because the Republicans have already declared nuclear war on the Supreme Court. And today was the culmination of that battle, right? This is exactly what they've been working for since 1973. So I think it's an uphill climb. It's going to be a long battle because nothing that progressives ever do starts out particularly popular, and that's okay. But, I think that whether it must be done is a different question of whether or not Democrats have the spine to actually do it. But to your point, it absolutely is going to take some big thing to get people to pay attention to the Supreme Court, people on the left in particular, to pay attention to the Supreme Court and realize that there actually is a solution to this problem. Congress can add seats to the Supreme Court. You don't need a constitutional amendment to make this happen. What I think is already starting to happen, which is good, is that there have already been a lot of high-profile examples of the Supreme Court, overreaching, right? So they've now gutted the Voting Rights Act twice. They allowed SB 8 to go into effect over the summer. They are forcing the Biden administration to continue with Trump's racist Remain in Mexico immigration policy. All of these things stick in the public's mind as bad. And in fact, the Supreme Court's approval ratings are the lowest they have ever been. So when people don't like something, they typically want to change it. So it's going to take some work to get people to understand how important Supreme Court expansion is to a healthy democracy. It's going to take a lot of work to get Senate Democrats and Joe Biden to support that as well. But if they, and I think that they're going to, effectively overturn Roe v. Wade next June, there really is no other option. This is not now an institution that you can rehabilitate. That would be so far off the rails of mainstream legal thought, and not just about abortion, but about how the Supreme Court decides cases and then maintains that precedent over the course of years. There is no way to fix that other than to add the seats. And so if Joe Biden's not there yet, he needs to get there.
Well, perhaps instead of clutching our pearls when they denied Merrick Garland to Obama, we should have had a more forthright, at least they showed their hand on what they were willing to do.
Oh, yeah. The whole ball game is the federal courts, and it always has been. I mean, actually, Donald Trump didn't get much done while he was president, but what he did do
Thank God.
was, I know, yes, that's correct. But what he did do was big time tax cuts for rich people, and he overtook the federal judiciary. That's pretty big. Whenever Mitch McConnell is looking at something, we need to look there too. And he spent the 4 years that Donald Trump was president staring down the federal courts. Donald Trump is responsible for confirming almost a third of the overall federal judiciary. So Trump is not president anymore. He is gone. But the people that he picked to sit on the federal courts will be there for life, for the rest of their lives. And a lot of them are really young, like 36, 37 years old. So Trumpism persists in the federal judiciary, even though Donald Trump himself is not currently president. This is very scary. People need to understand that the courts themselves are hostile to democratic interests because of who is picking these judges. So even if we get stuff passed through Congress, which I think is critically important, That's actually not the end game. The end game is to fix the courts too. Otherwise, we won't be able to keep any of the stuff that we actually get passed. That includes voting rights, that includes democracy reform. If the Women's Health Protection Act, which would set, federal right to abortion, all of that stuff is at risk unless we fix the courts as well. So Senate Democrats might not be there yet. Joe Biden might not be there yet, but they need to get there because the Supreme Court is helping sort of the Trumpist forces move forward, even though Trump is not currently the president.
Meagan Hatcher-Mays, attorney and director of democracy policy for Indivisible. The interview is over now.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here with me.
Problem.
I really appreciate it. And I'm sure our viewers appreciate you breaking down that what seems to be an ominous and potentially depressing day in the history of women's rights.
I wish I had better news for everyone, but there's still fight left, I think, out there. So, and as you can see, I literally could talk about the courts for hours. So if you ever want to talk,
oh, good. I am literally calling you back immediately. We've been covering voting rights for the whole time here. So I definitely would love to get your take on as that moves forward. Okay, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Wasn't that great? Meagan Hatcher-Mays from Indivisible. You can find her on Twitter at Meagan Hatcher-Mays. Now coming up pretty soon, after I encourage you to like our page and share us with your friends and et cetera, et cetera. Coming up next, we have a little bit of coverage from the live protest rallies that happened outside of the Supreme Court yesterday. That's all coming up with our friend Heidi Sieck, who's joining us for our action rundown. Stay tuned. There were many protests outside of the Supreme Court building yesterday while jurors heard arguments in the case of Mississippi versus Jackson Women's Health. There were folks rallying both in favor of protecting a woman's right to bodily autonomy and opposed. There were people also out there opposed to women being able to make their own decisions. Those people are known as, the patriarchy collectively. Vote Pro-Choice co-founder Heidi Sieck was at the demonstrations and participated in direct action and civil disobedience, and she did it without endangering or killing any elected officials or defacing and degrading any sacred public spaces. She will be joining us in a moment, but here's the video of the action she participated in, just to give you a sense of the scene on the ground. As you can see, they were blocking the street, and in a little while, Heidi got arrested, and we were actually there to catch that on camera as well. Let's take a look.
Woo! This is what democracy looks like. Vote pro-choice. I'll see you in every election everywhere next year. Every election everywhere. We gotta elect different people. This doesn't happen anymore.
Heidi, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. You're out of jail?
Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, I'm in a hotel room in DC. I have to go back to jail and pay my fine today. But yes.
How much does it cost to do an act of civil disobedience?
This one is $50 cash.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and we do get an arrest record as a result of this. So it
But
has,
you already have one of those, do you not?
yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, an arrest record is something to be proud of when you are trying to protect a woman's right to bodily autonomy.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I really appreciated seeing that footage. I hadn't seen them together yet. And it's, listen, I'm very moved by the fact that I have the privilege of putting myself in that position. I have both, the privilege of my race and the privilege of the fact that I have $50 in cash that I can do it. I can have a arrest record in DC without major consequences to my life. So it is a major privilege and very much a part of why I chose to participate in this action. And also,
why do you think that getting arrested is such an important part of the kind of civil disobedience that was going on yesterday?
Well, two things. One, obviously, nonviolent civil disobedience is part of the fabric of this country. It's how we have achieved civil rights, voting rights, and so many people have put themselves on the line and put their bodies on the line for these issues that are most important. So that is it's critical to being able to move democracy forward, and it's specifically very, very critical for people like me who are out there standing in solidarity with folks. But the second piece is that we really wanted to make the case of the direction this country has taken with regard to reproductive freedom and body autonomy. The country is moving to a place where our reproductive health is being criminalized. There are people serving time in jail right now in the United States of America for inducing miscarriages. There have been women that have been charged with 20 years in jail for taking the same abortion pills that I did 20 years ago when I had my medication abortion after my divorce. And so this is a point that we're trying to make, that when I said this is what democracy looks like, we are seeing a shift in the way that the structures of government, federal government, are starting to criminalize abortion. Mm-hmm. And we had to show that. You will also notice, I want to be clear, that on the Supreme Court, around the Supreme Court yesterday were hundreds of people. Hundreds. Yeah. And also at Union Square. And you will see that there weren't a lot of folks that were in that civil disobedience group. It was probably 50 or 60 that were part of the group. And I'm certain, of all the acts of civil disobedience that I've participated in over the years, I am certain that the fear of what happened on January 6th, the fear of what would happen with law enforcement really did make it something that didn't feel comfortable for a lot of people to express their First Amendment rights of protest and speaking out against the government. So that's also something that we have to be really scared of as we see that that's not accessible for folks anymore.
We have some footage that we're going to play in a moment of some Congress people speaking, but behind in the background, and you'll hear it, you can actually hear counter protesters, people protesting and saying, we don't, what was it? Give us a sense of what it was like on the ground to be kind of face to face with these people who would have a woman's right to make decisions about her own body removed from her, while at the same time, these are the same people saying I should have the right to not wear a mask.
Oh, yes. So first of all, I have always been talking about the overly funded anti-choice minority of people. First, I want to reiterate the perspective that we are a pro-choice nation. Over 80% of this country does not want Roe v. Wade overturned. People understand the importance of reproductive freedom. 1 in 4 women will choose to have an abortion. 2/3 of those are mothers, and that's every party. So you see hundreds of people out in front of the Supreme Court. A portion of them are anti-choice, and they've all had abortions too. So that's just something we have to keep in mind whenever we're approaching the analysis of something like this. So it was definitely a hodgepodge of people yesterday out front of the Supreme Court. There were a lot of anti-choice protesters that were there, and you could see their infrastructure after 30 years of funding, after the political strategy that the Republican Party has made to make sure this vehement, about 18% of the population that is vehemently anti-choice, you could see that they had the infrastructure and the funding to be able to show up. And so it was lots of folks there that were expressing their desire to control people's choices.
Do we think that, it's a Supreme Court decision. They're supposed to be above the political fray, which clearly they're showing their partisan roots and their partisan nature at this point. Does that play in to thoughts and decisions about protesting? I know people protest when their electeds are going to vote to show in force that we care, that we're paying attention, and that next election cycle we will vote them out if they don't, vote in a way that protects the people. But we're a protest in front of the Supreme Court. They are not really accountable to people because they don't have to be voted in or out. Can you talk a little bit about the difference therein?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I appreciate this question because it allows us to reflect a little bit about how things have advanced and changed and shifted. So again, like I talked about, over the last 30 years, an overly funded anti-choice minority have really taken over the GOP and focused very much on state and local governments, taking over state legislatures, and also taking over the recruitment of extreme conservative judges. That has been part of the plan. So this is the result of decades of recruitment and support for this group of conservative judges to be placed in lifetime appointments. The Federalist Society was founded in 1983, around the same time of the anti-choice movement has been funded and uplifted. So what we have right now is that the Supreme Court, with its 6-3 extreme conservative majority, has judges there that are no longer, they're really no longer impartial jurists, because by nature of the political infrastructure that they came up through. And so, yes, that's true, protesting in front of the Supreme Court. You can't, in theory, lobby the Supreme Court. That is not, once a piece of legislation gets to the Supreme Court, it's already too late. And so, my perspective here is that we have abdicated so much by not investing and focusing on state legislatures, because that's where these horrible laws have gone. However, we have a Supreme Court that is objectively political now, with two basically stolen seats with Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. You've got folks that are really empowered to make strategic decisions for a particular outcome. Brett Kavanaugh is an intellectually dishonest, and he's like the weakest intellectual on that board, but you know what? His background is all about being a political operative. And so that there's scheming and strategy going on. And let's talk about the case itself, which is there's no reason for them to even take it up if they weren't going to try to change some policy. Roe v. Wade, Casey are both precedent. They're both precedent. And so there is zero reason to take this case up at all unless there was a strategy around it.
I noticed that I think it was Sonia Sotomayor, when I was watching the footage or listening to, the questioning, she said something like, well, shouldn't Congress be making the laws? And I don't know if she was trying to push Congress to make Roe v. Wade, make accessible abortion, women's right to choose, the law of the land. She even questioned the Supreme Court's authority to legislate over this issue.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it is not the role of the Supreme Court to legislate these policy matters. It's the role of the Supreme Court to interpret the rights and freedoms that are inherently baked into the Constitution, of which at least 3, if not more, decisions of the Supreme Court have said that there is a right to privacy around birth control, sex, marriage, and abortion in the Constitution. And so overturning any kind of right to privacy pursuant to Roe v. Wade is putting a lot of precedent at stake around the right to privacy, particularly around intimate decisions, relationships, and sex. And so we are in a very precarious, scary situation here. And it just inherently goes to show it is political. And go back to the
interesting, because the people on the right are like, we want privacy. We don't want you to know anything. We don't want our medical, all of that. And yet they are undermining their own right to privacy in their ignorance of really the legal implications of this case.
I don't, honestly, I don't think it's necessarily ignorance. It's just a matter of what are the priorities here? And fundamentally, the priorities here are misogyny, control over particular women and people who are marginalized and vulnerable. And it is white supremacy for sure. And so it's always been baked into this issue across the board, always has been. And now with the investment in this infrastructure and these political Supreme Court justices who are now empowered with the 6-3 majority, we get to see what has always been there. I've been in the reproductive rights movement for 30 years, and since the moment that Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, there has been a strategy of this faction of the nation, the racist, white supremacist, misogynist, of which we know this nation has a big, evil faction of.
We definitely know now. If we didn't know before.
And a lot of people know, what I mean? Like a lot of people know that this is what the country has been built upon. And it's always been there. And now we have to face it. And the fact is that we are in a place where this faction of people have been empowered because of their investment in infrastructure. And that's what we have now with the Supreme Court.
Heidi, if the Supreme Court does the unthinkable, which is now thinkable,
it's thinkable. Oh, it's absolutely.
God. If this does happen, would the Congress have any legal ability? Where would the fight go? Would we go to Congress to press for a law? Like where would the fight go?
The fight goes in 3 places, actually. One is, of course, yes, Congress can pass federal legislation. It's called the Women's Health Protection Act that I believe the House of Representatives have already passed. So once again, it's an issue of filibuster reform in the Senate, but like the Women's Health Protection Act would codify Roe into federal legislation, and we would have federal protection of abortion and reproductive health. So pass that. Let's pass that. Let's call our Congress people, our senators, to make sure that they are lifting that up. But again, it's an issue of filibuster reform, and we're not sure that we could get that passed. So all hands on deck to get the Women's Health Protection Act passed to the Senate and signed by Joe Biden. We should do it. But as you have discussed in your legal analysis of what happened yesterday, you know that there's 2 ways that this is going to go. It will either move the line for protection of abortion from about 23 weeks, which is the viability constraints of Roe v. Wade. So the United States of America, no states are allowed to prohibit access to abortion after viability, which is now about 23, 24 weeks. It would either move that line to 15 weeks because of the structure of this abortion ban, which is what Chief Justice Roberts really seems like he wants to do. Or it would overturn Roe, the protection of Roe completely, and hand it over to the state legislatures, 26 of which have already set up either pre-Roe abortion bans or are ready to ban abortion outright all the way. So it creates about 56% of this country that is hostile to reproductive freedom. And that means everybody's going to be traveling to blue states, sanctuaries, all of that. So where does that fight go? It goes to the state legislatures. We must be focusing on electing pro-choice people in state legislatures. And then even the 3rd place that it must go is elected criminal justice positions, because these are the folks that are going to be investigating miscarriages, investigating pregnancies, investigating people who are accessing abortion in some form or the other. So that would include your elected district attorneys, elected judges, elected sheriffs at the county and city level, as well as your elected coroners. There are some, because they're going to be investigating, and medical examiners are sometimes elected. So we really want to be recruiting and focusing on the criminal justice positions in the county and city level.
Wow.
So
That is insane. It's all going to be guys. I mean, not to just, it's all going to be guys who have no clue. I mean, when I was pregnant, that's the first thing I learned is that they don't have a clue about what this is all about. The interesting thing about, there's so many interesting things here.
Say that we should be electing great school boards, which we know isn't also a target of the GOP and QAnon and the radical right now. So we should be electing great school boards who are making sure that we have comprehensive sex education so that people know how bodies work.
Yeah, it would be great to have sex education or any education at all in our public schools. It seems like that's a whole nother, and that's a whole nother issue. We have a bunch of footage from the actions that were outside of the Supreme Court yesterday. And I'd love to get your feedback on some of the things that were said. This is one of the protesters. I believe this person was sitting very close to you as I was watching the footage. Let's hear what this person had to say.
Bodily autonomy, right? The right to control my body, the right to not be forced to have a child, and all that comes with that. The dangers of childbirth, the taking care of a child, all those things, those are burdens on women, and only women have to suffer them. And so it seems, like we should be able to choose whether or not we want to have a child or not. And it would be great if we didn't have to be forced to have sex, and that happens a lot too. I bet you 1 in 3 of these women have been raped. I have been raped. If I'd gotten pregnant in that, imagine being forced to have the baby. So, yeah, these are important issues. Have a lot at stake for women.
So tell people, what was going on out here today? What were you all doing?
What do you mean, over here?
Yeah.
Just doing a little civil disobedience so that we could, make a point that we're willing to be arrested for this issue. Yeah.
I think you made that point a little bit earlier. Your thoughts on what she said?
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is an issue of foundational freedom. There are so many different, there's a ton of propaganda. There's a ton of misinformation. There's a huge amount of investment in junk science and fake medical studies that are infiltrating our country about like the nuances and the religious perspectives and all of that with regard to abortion and medical science and all of that. So much of it is fake. Fundamentally, this issue is about control and freedom. And the fact that, as Sonia Sotomayor said, when does the life of the person who is pregnant come into play here? When does that enter the calculus? And it's really that fundamental perspective that women and non-binary people and trans people are fully autonomous humans that should be supported and able to exercise their body autonomy in this country. And so, she's right, and so much more.
Oh, so much more. We have some of our elected Congress people speaking at the rallies. Let's start with Barbara Lee.
Here once again at the Supreme Court to protect abortion rights. And we're not going to let those anti-choice state legislators take away our rights and our freedom. It's our freedom that's at stake. This case is the first time in 50 years that the court is hearing a case that directly challenges Roe versus Wade. Now, let me tell you, I am one of the 1 in 4 women who have had an abortion. But let me tell you, I remember when abortion was criminalized before Roe versus Wade. But you know what? I survived. Many women did not survive, especially Black women. And so I know personally how devastating the consequences of restrictive abortion laws can be.
Heidi, your thoughts about, you can just give me your random thoughts, but I have, or your well thought out thoughts, but I have some specific questions. One is, how important is it that people like Representative Lee disclose that they are one of the 1 in 4?
Oh, so important. Absolutely 100% important. You know why? Well, here, let's also unpack the data a little. It's 1 in 4 now, but I think it was 8 or 10 years ago, it was 1 in 3 because of more access to birth control and, more availability that was included in the Affordable Care Act, coverage for birth control and stuff. So the abortion rate has gone down. So it's 1 in 4 now. And it is so important for us to be sharing our stories because let me tell you, this overly funded anti-choice minority has made us all feel so much shame about our stories. There's the talking point and the hand wringing and the, safe, legal, and rare. Don't ever say that ever again. And it's such a hard decision. Let me give you the stats. I'll give you the stats and then I'll tell you my own story, which is 1 in 3 women have had an abortion. 2/3 of those are mothers, and about 82% of those folks do not regret it. And it is something that we just that we haven't been willing to share. Not for a second did I ever regret my abortion. My story is I'd gotten out of a divorce. I was moving. My life was chaotic. I wasn't taking my birth control pills regularly. I was dating this guy. I accidentally got pregnant. I was not going to co-parent with this person. No way. And it was just not even a question.
Oh.
And it was covered by my insurance. I was living in San Francisco. I went straight to my regular OB and I went on with my life to be able to be of service, to get a master's degree, to build great companies, great projects in the world, and hopefully make the world a better place. And that would not have been possible without access like that.
I have a different story, and I've never really told it, but it does have to do with reproductive rights. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about this. So, I thought maybe I was pregnant. That was a couple weeks after the actual conception. So I took the test. And when I took the test, it said yes. And then I went to the I called the doctor and they said, well, we're not going to see you for, until you're 8 to 12 weeks pregnant.
Yes.
Okay, wait. Then let me tell you the rest of this.
Okay.
So if the ban is at 6 weeks, okay. So the rest of this story, where this goes is, then I had my first appointment. Then they send you for the scan. The scan is a couple weeks after that. My scan said, you've got a massive problem here. It's very, very possible that you are going to have either a miscarriage or you are going to have to birth carry to term and birth a stillbirth child, or the child will not be viable outside of the womb for more than a couple of weeks. Now, thank you for clutching your heart, because that is exactly how I felt. The prospect of these things was unthinkable. Lucky for me, I had the privilege of knowing someone from college who went on to become a gynecologist, who I called, and she said, yes, it's very bad news, but I do think you should get a second opinion. She pulled strings. It was another 2 weeks before I could get into that appointment. I got into that appointment and the person said, I actually don't see a problem here. It looks like the test is going to be, you're going to be fine. 3 more weeks for a genetic test. That's, I don't know, do the math. I think it was something like 20 weeks in to find out that I was not going to have to go through an extremely traumatic event just for this, child to then suffer and die outside the womb. That was the best case scenario. And if I had 6 weeks to make that decision or 15 weeks to make that decision, I would have had to make it with very little information. And I can tell you right now, I would not have the beautiful daughter that I have today. I think people think that these weak bans will stop people from having abortions. But as it turns out, it might make people say, I'm not going to go, I can't go through that and have an abortion they might not otherwise have had. I mean, there's these stories, that are almost like against this. My story, I just realized when I was thinking through this, it's totally against this whole narrative, of like, I don't have enough money. I wanted the child, but I didn't want her to suffer. I didn't want to go through an emotional trauma. Anyone who's had a miscarriage knows that anyone who's been pregnant at all knows you're always hoping there's no miscarriage, and you're looking and you're hoping and is that a spot of blood? Is that, I just think it's just like these people do not understand, and they're paid to not understand, and they're paid to use this wedge issue to divide us as a nation. And it's pretty sickening.
Julianna, thank you so much for sharing that story, because you are absolutely right. It touches on absolutely everything that is going on with this issue. Number one, why are we not empowered to tell the reality of the story? Number two, your story is the same as the small number of folks that are on the anti-choice side too. They have the same experiences. They are having abortions, and they're having miscarriages too. It's just a real fundamental manipulation of the idea of control of people's bodies. And just think about you having to go through all the decisions that you were going through and the access issues. If you didn't have resources, if you didn't have relationships, and if you had the law enforcement was involved,
It's unbelievable.
Manipulating your miscarriage and all. So it is very, very important for us to be sharing these stories, because it lifts up the reality of people's lives and creates that connection of, oh, that's me too.
Representative Jayapal also told her story. We have 2 videos of her. Let's play them back to back, and then we'll get back to our comments.
Here once again at the Supreme Court to protect abortion rights.
This is Barbara
And we're not
Lee. Let's go.
Also one of the 1 in 4 women in America who have had an abortion. For me, terminating my pregnancy was not an easy choice, but it was my choice. And that's what it should be for every pregnant person across Mississippi, across Texas, across Georgia, across every part of this country, regardless of zip code or income or race. And until 2019, I never spoke about my abortion. It was over a decade. I didn't even tell my mother about it. And I ultimately decided to tell my story as one of the first members of Congress to do so, because I was so deeply concerned about the abhorrent abortion bans that were coming out of states throughout America. And I wanted to share my story because there are so many different situations that people face in making these choices, and nobody should interfere with our bodies, our lives, and our choices. This is not about healthcare. This is about controlling our bodies. It's all about control. People that are for these abortion bans are about punishing women and pregnant people. They're about eroding constitutional rights while disproportionately harming low-income people and people of color. So today, I am here again speaking out with this message. Do not criminalize me and millions of women like me across the country. Do not criminalize those that help us. Do not criminalize the clinics or the doctors. Do not criminalize the choices that we make about our own bodies and our futures.
Mm-hmm. So beautiful. And, a couple of things that I noticed there, you could hear some of the chanting from the other folks in the background saying just the most horrible things, not just with a vested interest in not understanding at all what the issue is. And also, I have a question for you, because I think there's something going on there that's a bad look PR-wise that we are doing. When Representative Boxer said, Representative Lee and Representative Jayapal said that that they had an abortion, the crowd cheered. And I don't think that I'm assuming that they're cheering for the fact that it was safe and legal and in support of them coming out and saying it in public. I'm right about that. Am I right? Am I not?
Oh,
because
yeah.
It's a terrible look. And I know they're going to use it against us.
Understand how important. So again, let's root ourselves in reality, which is we are a pro-choice nation. The majority of the people in this country believe that we should have body autonomy and reproductive freedom. And we have told ourselves stories that it's a divisive issue and that we should not talk about it. It's shameful. It's about sex, it's sexuality, it's about very intimate things that we are very uncomfortable with. And so the fact is that this is an issue of freedom and body autonomy, and that it should 100% be a perspective that we can be in community about. And so I believe that for all of us who are standing in these movements, that hearing someone of an authority who is brave and who is telling their truth, it unleashes a feeling of connection, and it unleashes a feeling of reduces the amount of shame and makes us all realize that we all have so many similar experiences. And this is women, non-binary people, trans people. And now let's talk about also the men who have benefited from all of the choices that pregnant people have made, and the freedom and autonomy that's also been generated by the men in this country for the children that they have not been required to father.
Yeah, that's a whole nother
I
conversation.
do believe that the feeling in those rallies when people tell the truth is a feeling of like freedom and
Liberation. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that was out there so that we can clip it 100 times, because you know what's coming at us from the right for that this just a purposeful misunderstanding of what that celebration is about, what that connection and that outpouring of support is about.
Yeah, it's like we have to support each other in telling our stories. Otherwise, we're going to have to, because the constriction of reproductive freedom, the coercion now of the state legislatures and overly funded anti-choice minority of people forcing folks to stay pregnant. And we should actually name the fact that the Texas extreme 6-week abortion ban has been in effect since September 1st. So there are many, many people who are being forced to stay pregnant against their will in Texas, that this extreme coercion is going to require all of us who believe in body autonomy and freedom to connect together, to make to be on the side of liberation and work together to make sure that we express the fact that we are a pro-choice nation and start taking our power back.
Were there any male Congress people speaking at the rally yesterday? We couldn't show everyone who spoke.
I was a little bit busy getting arrested.
Right.
And nonviolent civil disobedience, so I can't speak to that.
Okay.
I wasn't there at the rally the entire time. I was detained.
You were detained. Heidi Sieck, co-founder of Vote Pro-Choice. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate your perspective. And in this critical time, we'll be certain to continue this conversation with you as time moves on.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share. And again, remember, everyone, our focus has got to now be on state legislatures and criminal justice positions throughout the country and every election everywhere. And I'm really grateful that we have the opportunity to talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You're watching ACT TV. Stay with us. There will be more. I hope you enjoyed that coverage of the events happening at SCOTUS around the Mississippi versus Jackson Women's Health. Yeah, we're going to have to watch what unfolds there, but I really appreciated both Meagan and Heidi coming on the program to help us break it down. I hope you did also. We will be back on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern right here, wherever you're watching. And then again on Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Next week, Josh Holland of The Nation joins us to break down our headlines, one of our very favorite segments that we do here on this show. We also have a few other special surprise guests coming on, so stay tuned for that. Put a bookmark here wherever you're watching. Follow ACT TV across platforms. We got a Twitter. We got well, we had a Twitch, but we don't have that anymore. We have a YouTube, we have a Facebook, we have a lot of stuff. So anyway, that's where you'll find us, act.tv. And I'm Julianna Forlano. You can follow me personally on Twitter at Julianna Forlano. Thanks so much. Thanks, Giancarlo, for producing. And we will see you next Tuesday.